My name is Cassidy Hartwell, and I'm 31 years old. 4 days before my sister's wedding, I was standing in the kitchen of my apartment on Gerrard Street East with a mug of reheated coffee, and the kind of morning already going sideways in small ways. The shower had run cold. The oat milk I'd bought 2 days ago had somehow already gone off, and I couldn't find the matching lid for my travel mug, no matter where I looked. When my phone lit up with a message from my mother that made all of that irrelevant. The rehearsal dinner is Thursday, and the ceremony is Saturday. I need you to understand that neither are the right setting for you. Your sister is marrying into the Carmichael family, and we need this weekend to go smoothly. You have a way of complicating things that isn't intentional, I know, but it isn't something we can risk right now. Please don't reach out to your sister directly about this. She needs to stay focused. I put my mug down on the counter, picked it up again, set it back. My mother had always had a talent for delivering the worst things she could say in the flattest possible tone, the kind of tone that left you nothing to push against because there was no heat in it, no meanness she would later have to own. It was just a decision, administratively delivered, as if she had weighed all the relevant information and arrived at the only logical conclusion, which was that I should not exist within the borders of my sister's wedding weekend. You have a way of complicating things. I had been hearing that sentence since I was roughly 14 years old. Not always in those words. Sometimes it was, you always have to make everything harder than it needs to be. Or, why can't you just let things be? Or the slightly softer version she pulled out when she was trying to seem reasonable. You just see everything so differently, Cassidy. It had started when my father left, and I was the one who refused to pretend at Sunday dinners that the table wasn't missing someone. It had continued when I pointed out that her boyfriend 2 years later had borrowed $1,100 from her grocery envelope and never mentioned it again. And when I noticed the fine print on a vacation club membership she almost signed, and when I asked the financial advisor she trusted with her savings to explain, specifically, where the management fees were going. Every single time I had looked carefully at something and said what I saw, I had been the problem in the room. My sister Brooke was 34 and had spent the last several years working her way toward a particular kind of life. She had started dating Holden Carmichael about 18 months earlier, and within weeks of meeting him, she'd told our mother that his family had been in Ontario shipping and real estate since before Confederation. Old money. The real kind, the kind that didn't need to announce itself because the name did it for them. Our mother had practically vibrated with this information. She started ironing her blouses before his family's phone calls. She started referring to things as the Carmichaels do it this way, as casually as if she'd been saying it for years. I understood, in a way that didn't require me to approve of it, why she wanted this for Brooke. We had grown up in Scarborough, the three of us and our father until he wasn't, with a mortgage that got refinanced twice, and Christmases that got quieter as I got older. Brooke wanted something that looked nothing like that, and our mother wanted that wanting to be rewarded. I had just never needed the same things they needed, and that had always been exactly enough distance between us for something like this text to feel inevitable. I typed 4 responses and deleted every one of them. The last one ran to 3 paragraphs and ended with a sentence I would have regretted. None of them said the truest thing, which was something like, "You are telling me I do not deserve a seat in the room where my own sister gets married, and you are telling me 4 days before it happens, and I am going to feel this for a very long time whether you think that's reasonable or not." But I didn't send that either. My mother didn't receive things like that. She absorbed them, sorted them into the file labeled proof, and used them later. I sat down at the kitchen table, turned my phone face down, looked at the window and the gray late October sky outside it. Then, barely 2 minutes later, my phone buzzed again. No text this time, just a photo. It was the kind of engagement photo that cost real money to take. The lighting was warm and deliberate. The kind of warm that doesn't happen outdoors in October in Toronto without someone setting it up. They were standing in front of the old brick facades in the Distillery District. Brooke in a cream-colored wool coat, with her hair loose over one shoulder, laughing at something outside the frame, the way people laugh in photos when a photographer asks them to look at each other and say something only they would find funny. And beside her, his arm around her waist, stood the man my mother had attached no caption to, because the photo was meant to say everything on its own. I looked at him. I looked at him for what could not have been more than 4 or 5 seconds, before something in my chest went very still. I knew that face. Not from a dinner. Not from the carefully managed occasions over the past year and a half where I'd apparently always happened to be unavailable. I knew that face from somewhere else entirely, from a context so removed from a champagne-toned engagement photo in the distillery district that my brain spent a full moment simply refusing to put the two images in the same category. I knew that face from a file. 18 months before that morning, I had been working as a paralegal at a mid-sized litigation firm in Toronto's financial district. A significant part of my job was processing documents for cases under review with the Ontario Securities Commission. For 3 weeks during a particularly dense stretch of work, I had pulled, cross-referenced, and organized records related to a man the OSC was investigating for what the senior associate I worked under called an exempt market fraud. Essentially, he had been selling private placements to people, positioning them as high-yield, low-risk vehicles for RRSP funds. Safe place to put your retirement savings. Better returns than any bank. Government-registered accounts. Fully protected. He had the language down to the point where it sounded like something a reputable advisor at a trust company would say, not like a sales pitch, more like a quiet piece of insider knowledge being generously shared. He had taken approximately $340,000 from 11 families, most of them in the Hamilton and Burlington area, before complaints started coming in and he became unreachable at every address and number on file, and the state court application in the Superior Court of Ontario was the paperwork equivalent of a door that had been left open to an empty room. The man in that investigation had not been named Holden Carmichael. His name, typed across 3 separate OSC complaint documents and 1 Superior Court application number I still remembered, because I had entered it into our firm's system so many times, was Victor Marsh. I set my phone face down on the kitchen table. I picked it up again and looked at the photo, and I looked at it the way I had been trained without knowing I was being trained. By years of paralegal work, by reading documents carefully, by learning that the difference between the face a person presents and the face that ends up in a file is almost always visible if you know where to look. The jaw was the same, the set of the eyes was the same, and the posture was the same, that very specific way of carrying himself that read as old ease but was actually a performance. The posture of someone who had learned by watching that inherited confidence looks a certain way and had practiced until the copy was good enough to be mistaken for the original. I did not laugh. I did not cry. I sat at my kitchen table with my coffee going cold for the second time that morning, and I thought about 11 families who had handed this man their RRSP savings and never got them back. I thought about what it meant that he had graduated from exempt market fraud to this. To marrying money directly, skipping the intermediary entirely. I thought about my sister's grandmother's estate. I had heard Brooke mention it once, offhandedly, the way you mention something you haven't thought about much, because you don't need to yet. Money held in trust until she turned 35. She turned 34 next April. I opened my laptop. I went to CAN, the Canadian Legal Information Institute, the publicly searchable database of court decisions and filings, and I typed in Victor Marsh, Ontario. The OSC application was there, public records, stayed but filed. Below it, a small claims court judgment I had never seen during my time at the firm, a civil claim filed by a woman in Ancaster who had never recovered $28,000. Below that, a second filing under the same name, a different city, a different year. I put my phone beside the laptop and held the engagement photo next to the case document photograph. A background check photo, grainy, the kind pulled from a database, and I was not wrong. I had never been wrong about a face in a file before. It was the one part of my job that required a skill nobody had taught me specifically, just the accumulated result of learning to look at what was actually in front of you, rather than what you were being told to see. I picked up my phone and called the OSC investor tip line. It took 26 minutes to get through. When I did, I gave the person on the other end everything I had in the order I had it. The name Holden Carmichael. The face I recognized as Victor Marsh. The wedding date. The venue listed on the wedding website my mother had sent me 3 weeks earlier, with a message that said, so you know where to send your card. The woman I spoke to was methodical and careful. She confirmed she was noting the information. She gave me a case reference number. She did not make promises, and I did not ask for them. I wrote the reference number on the back of a hydro bill envelope that was sitting on the counter, and I hung up and I sat with the phone in my hands for a while. The obvious thing to do next, the thing I will admit I sat with longer than I'm comfortable admitting, was nothing. My mother had sent me a message 4 days before my sister's wedding telling me I was too much of a problem to include, and here was a version of the situation in which I took that message at face value, folded it, put it away, and let whatever was coming arrive on its own timeline. Victor Marsh had walked into my family's story and built himself a set, and my mother had decorated around him. And I could have told myself that was not my mess to sort out. But Brooke was still my sister. She had sat next to me in the back seat of our mother's Civic for every road trip I could remember from childhood, her shoulder pressed against mine on the long stretches through the Shield. She had been the one who sat outside the bathroom door when I got the call about our dad's heart attack, talking to me through the door about nothing in particular. She didn't try to say the right things. She just kept talking until I could breathe again and come out. She had grown into someone who wanted different things than I wanted and moved through the world in a way I had never fully understood. But she was still the person who had put her hand over mine in the hospital waiting room that night and not let go for 2 solid hours. I was not going to send her a text. I printed the Canlai documents from my building's shared printer in the lobby, all 14 pages, and I organized them in an order that made sense. The OSC complaint filings first, then the civil judgment, then the background check photograph from the case document, and then the engagement photo I had screenshotted and printed on regular paper, slightly soft, but clear. I put them in a folder I found in my desk drawer, the kind with the metal clasp, and I drove to Brooke's condo in Liberty Village. She buzzed me up without asking who it was, which meant she hadn't spoken to our mother yet, because if she had, she would not have let me pass the lobby door. When she opened her door, she was in paint-stained sweatpants with her hair up and a mug of tea in her hand, and a look on her face that moved through surprise and confusion and caution in about 2 seconds flat. Brooke had always been faster than people gave her credit for. "What is it?" she said, not a question. "I need you to sit down before I show you something," I said. She looked at the folder. "Cassidy." "Please," I said. "Please just sit down first." She sat. I laid the pages on her coffee table in the order I'd organized them, and I stepped back. I had learned from years of working in litigation that the moment before a person accepts something they don't want to accept requires a particular quality of silence. Words become things to argue with. Silence doesn't give you anything to push back against. Brooke picked up the first page, read it, turned to the second, set the first one down carefully. By the third page, she had slowed. By the fifth, she had gone back to the second and was rereading something. At the 7th or 8th page, she stopped reading continuously and just sat holding the pages, not looking at them, looking at the middle distance. Then she picked up the case photograph and the printed engagement photo and held them side by side without saying anything for a long time. "That's him," she said, not a question. "I recognized his face from a case I worked on while I was at my old firm," I said. "I cross-referenced it on Canlai before I came here. It's all public record." She placed the photos down on the coffee table with the deliberate care of someone keeping their hands steady, because keeping their hands steady is the only thing they can currently control. "His family," she said. "He took me to a house in Oakville. He said it had been in the family for 30 years. She stopped. "I met people he introduced as his parents. I sat in that house." "I know." He asked me, early on. He was very specific about my grandmother's trust, the timing of it. He said he just wanted to understand our financial picture. Her voice was steady in the way that comes after something has broken, and the pieces have settled into a new arrangement. I thought it was because he was serious. I thought it was because he wanted to plan. Outside her window, a streetcar went by on King Street and made the particular sound that Toronto streetcars make on cold evenings, that low, metallic scrape that I had heard my whole life and stopped noticing until moments when everything slows down enough for the background to become very loud. "I need to call my mother," she said. "I know." She looked at me steadily. "She told you not to come." "She did." "She told you 4 days before." "Yes." She held my gaze for a moment with an expression I didn't have a clean word for, something rawer than gratitude. The look of a person who has just understood how close they were, standing to the edge of something that had no visible drop. She went to her kitchen and called our mother. I stayed on the couch and listened to half of a conversation I had spent the drive over imagining. I heard Brooke's voice steady itself. I heard her say, "I know," several times in a row, the way you say it when you're not actually agreeing, just trying to find the ground beneath you. I heard her say Cassidy came here and showed me something, and then silence on Brooke's end while our mother's voice, too far away for me to make out words, but distinct in its tone, did what it always did when it received information that hadn't come through her first. Brooke came back and sat down. "She's calling the venue coordinator," she said. "Okay." A pause. She didn't ask how I was. I didn't have anything useful to add to that. I had spent a long time letting myself be surprised by the particular architecture of my mother's priorities, the way she moved to logistics the moment something disrupted her narrative, the way she solved the external problem first and came back to the internal one later, or sometimes never. I had stopped being surprised some years ago. I hadn't stopped feeling it. "There were other people," Brooke said. She meant the complaints in the filing, before me. 11 that filed formally, probably more who didn't. She sat with that. "And the OSC, have they been told?" "I called the tip line before I came here. I have a case reference number." She looked at me carefully. "You called before you came here." "I wanted it documented before I did anything else. So there was a file number, so it wasn't just a family member making an accusation." She was quiet for a moment, then she said quietly, "That's so like you." The wedding did not happen on Saturday. There was no ceremony at the heritage property in Caledon that Brooke had spent 6 months selecting, and my mother had spent 6 months filling with plans. There was a call to the venue coordinator, a florist order canceled the following morning, and a deposit dispute that I helped Brooke write a formal letter about 3 weeks later. She recovered 60% of it after some back and forth, which under the circumstances felt like a small and statistically improbable mercy. Victor Marsh disconnected his phone number and vacated the Yorkville apartment he'd been renting under the Holden Carmichael name within roughly 48 hours. The OSC investigation was formally reopened. 7 months after that Tuesday morning in my kitchen, a contact at my old firm mentioned during a lunch that the file had been referred to the RCMP's Financial Crimes Unit and that there were complaints in British Columbia that investigators had connected to the same individual. She couldn't tell me more than that, and I didn't press. I wrote nothing down. I just sat with it for a while and then went back to my afternoon. My mother never said she was sorry for the text. She didn't raise it, and I chose, with some effort, not to. 3 months after everything had come apart, she called me on a Sunday afternoon and asked if I would come and help her go through Brooke's vendor contracts to see which deposits might be recoverable. She said she needed someone who understood paperwork. Her voice when she asked had a quality I had not heard from her before, smaller, a little careful, like she was speaking from a room she didn't usually open the door to. I said yes and drove over. We sat at her kitchen table for almost 3 hours with a stack of contracts and a notepad, and 2 cups of coffee that she kept refilling without asking whether I wanted more. She didn't say I'm sorry for the text. At one point near the second hour, when we were going through a catering contract that turned out to have a clause that worked in Brooke's favor, she put her hand briefly on top of mine and pressed once before she went back to reading. I told myself that was enough. Not because it was, fully, but because I had learned that some distances between people don't close all the way. They just stop growing. And sometimes you have to decide that's the version of things you can live with. Brooke and I had coffee a few months after that, just the two of us at a cafe on Roncesvalles she'd been wanting to try. Neither of us finished what we ordered. We talked about other things mostly, and then near the end she said without any preamble, "She sent you that photo to rub it in. That was the whole point of sending it. She wanted you to feel left out." She was looking at her cup, and it was the only reason any of this got stopped. "I know," I said. "If you hadn't worked those files, if you hadn't been the way you are." She stopped and tried again. "She sent it to hurt you. That was what she meant it to do." "I know." She looked up at me. "That's almost funny." "Almost," I said. My mother had spent 4 days building a careful perimeter around a wedding she was trying to make look exactly right, and she had used a photo of the groom to do it, thinking the photo was a clean way to draw the line. She had no idea that I was the only person in that family who had ever looked at that face across a document under a fluorescent light at 11 o'clock on a work night and cataloged exactly what was wrong with it. They had removed the wrong person from the table. And I have thought about that a lot since then. Not with bitterness, exactly, or not only bitterness, but with something I don't have a perfect word for. The version of me that could have taken my mother's text at face value and decided that not being wanted was reason enough to stay out of it would have been easier for everyone, and would have cost my sister a trust she'd been waiting 34 years to access. Plus, whatever came after that, because men like Victor Marsh do not stop. I'm not telling this story to make a point about how families owe each other apologies. I'm telling it because I spent most of my adult life being told that the way I was built, careful, thorough, someone who reads the document nobody asked her to read, someone who notices what doesn't quite line up, was a liability in the rooms I was trying to be part of. I'm telling it because the thing that made me the inconvenient one, the one who complicates things, turned out to be the only thing standing between my sister and a man who had already done this to 11 other families and walked away clean. Sometimes the person they cut from the guest list is exactly the person the guest list needed.